Got a lot we're going to talk about this morning in the course of the next couple of hours. I've been mentioning for the last several days. We have a guest who will be joining us just after 9 o'clock news this morning. Lieutenant Colonel Steve Heil happened to be the administrator of the Shuttle Challenger Commission. 31 years ago today, the shuttle took off from Florida, blew up not long after it got off the launch pad. There was a massive investigation. Steve oversaw that while he was working with the U.S. Air Force. He had just finished planning the 1985 inaugural for Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. In fact, he'd been living with the Bush family while that was all taking place. Finished that duty, was coming near the end of his service in the Air Force, and he got a telephone call, and someone said, go over to the White House right now. And he sat in the White House hallway until about midnight. Someone called him in and said, we need you for this job. He has some thoughts today on the direction that NASA has taken in the last several years. Obviously, the space program was a big part of most of our lives. If you were growing up in a certain generation as I was, it was the most fascinating thing that we could ever imagine. And the most, I think, important moment in my life was when I was, just before I was going into the second grade that summer, when men actually walked on the moon for the first time. One of those men actually worked with Steve on that commission. So he'll be joining us coming up a little after 9 o'clock news this morning. In the meantime, I also may have a guest coming along shortly from the Twin Falls County Sheriff's Department just for an update on some issues that they happen to be working on. But in the meantime, when I got out of work yesterday afternoon, I had to go run some errands, and by the time I got home and sat down and had my dinner, it was getting somewhat close to bedtime, and I decided to do a little reading and catching up on a few things that we left hanging yesterday morning before I actually got off the air yesterday, and doing a lot of reading on what actually transpired in Oregon a couple of days ago after one of the ranchers who had been camping out at the Malheur Wildlife Refuge was killed in a shootout. It's called a shootout with authorities. I'm saying authorities because it was likely a mix of some police officers and also some federal agents who happened to be there at the time. And what we're hearing are a lot of different witness testimonies, put it that way, witness testimonies. Witnesses who were there, but here's the thing. A lot of them were trying to crane their necks and turn around and see what was going on. And the thing is, from what I've been reading, you got about half a dozen different stories that seem to be making the rounds about what happened. So we may never know actually the whole truth. And it looks as if we're going to be trying to sort this out for a very, very long time. But what I seem to gather from at least pieces of the testimony coming in from different people who were there is this. LaVoy Finicum was either in the rear of this caravan when they came up on the roadblock, or he was near the rear of the caravan and decided to turn his pickup truck around and go back. But in the effort, managed to get the truck stuck in some snow. So he leaped from the truck. Now, here's the question. Did he leap, and was he going to threaten the people who were there at the roadblock? Or did he just leap from the truck? Because many of us, I have been stuck before. I have to admit that. It's not the most pleasant thing to talk about because, well, when you're a guy, you don't like to admit that that's happened to you. You think that you're above all of that. But you leap from the vehicle really fast, and you run around and you check and see how and where you got stuck. And in a situation like that, if suddenly he flung the door open and he jumped out of the truck, when the agents who were there are telling people, calm and stay still, did they perceive that as a threat? Because this could have been a terrible tragedy in that sense. He could have been jumping out to check his truck and see what tire was stuck in the snow, and unfortunately that may have been taken as a threatening move by, and we also know that he said he wasn't planning to go to prison, that he would just as soon die. And that's the other part that comes out about all of this. Now, saying all of this, and I wrote a commentary on our website about it yesterday, and there's a response today from somebody at Vanderbilt University. Well, that may mean somebody who graduated from Vanderbilt University who said he wanted a piece of land, and now he's got it. It's going to be about 18 square feet, meaning his grave. And the fellow had no sympathy for the man. And again, I don't expect anyone on the left, if it had been an Occupy demonstrator or a Black Lives Matter demonstrator, or this Michael, what was his last name again, the kid from Ferguson, Missouri, they'd be screaming bloody murder. But since it happens to be somebody they don't like, who has politics that they don't like, then this is considered okay, right? This is considered okay on their part. And in fact, I think more of us ought to die who have those differing the sooner the better, the differing political views. So I happen to be thinking about that this morning, and I'm going to tell you right now, none of this would have ever come about if it had not yet been for these two ranchers from Burns, Oregon being sent off to federal prison a second time after they'd already done a sentence. You see, again, the causality of this, where it all started, it's like playing pool. You know, the original shot got this all going. If it hadn't been for that, the original pool shot, making an analogy here, we're not actually playing pool. You understand that, right? You have to explain that for the lefties out there because, they don't have an ability to really do any critical thinking. But all of a sudden that ball hits the break and balls go scattering in every direction, and you can't always predict where they're all going to go. Unless you're a very, very good player, on the level of the old timers like Willie Mosconi and Minnesota Fats. Many of those guys long, long gone at this point. But I'm telling you right now, none of this had to happen. None. Zilch. Nada. And if somebody from the government had stepped in, and I said it in the post that I put on our website yesterday, all you needed was the White House, the President of the United States, to come forward and say, I'm going to release these two men. They've done their time. I'm doing it as an act of goodwill. I will do it if you leave the refuge. And then I think the people at the refuge would have said, all right, we take that act of good faith. We'll leave the refuge. Everything else can be negotiated. Charges against us, land use issues, all of that can be negotiated, which is, I think, a proper course of action. I'm not even aware. I'm sure in a briefing room, the president was told this was going on, but I'm not really aware that it was very much on his radar. And for that reason, it didn't get addressed. Other than somebody, somewhere, the governor of Oregon finally demanded get rid of these men, and the government stepped in. And we have a handful that are still left at the refuge, but more have surrendered. If you were listening to Fox News here at 8 o'clock this morning, we have several of them that have already said they're going to throw in the towel. There are still a few there, but Ammon Bundy is telling them through his lawyer, please leave, please go home. Speaking of Ammon Bundy, his father, speaking to reporters yesterday, apparently agrees with me, at least on this one sense. It didn't have to come to this.
What kind of person does that? Well, I'll tell you what kind of person does it. That's the kind of person we're fed up with in America. That's the bureaucrat that thinks that he's got more power and don't give a damn about our lives no more. He don't give about our ranches. He don't give about our cattle. He don't give about the interior, the resource, anything.
I'd say that he is a little emotional at the moment because of all of this. It's 8:14. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. It's 22. You're listening to News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Story in the Salt Lake Tribune. Utah ranchers renounce federal control of their lands at gathering with ties to Oregon occupation. I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment, but what does that mean? Well, I'll tell you what. The very serious thing here that means is what we said yesterday could happen. Now there's a martyr out there. This thing could spread like wildfire. You're up next. You're on the air on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com.
Don't call him a martyr because he, for his own free will, picked up the gun and went over there. Nobody told him to go.
Like Michael
He
Brown?
went by his own free will. And if, for example, there's a cliff. And
Are you salivating over
straight,
this?
If I keep walking straight, it's my fault.
Do you get an orgasm
it's
over this?
Because it created the canyon. What a foolish...
Do you get an orgasm over this? When you talk about law breaking in this country, for instance, we have millions of people who break the law and they come across our southern border. Some of them bring drugs and firearms. Maybe they should all be shot. Maybe what we should do is put 50 caliber gun emplacements all along the border between Mexico and the United States. And when we see them coming, just mow them down in waves. Because you know why? They're breaking the law. How does our caller feel about something like that? That would settle that problem quickly, because if I knew I was going to get ventilated even trying, I think I would stay home. That's the thing. The leftists, they're orgasmic over this. They're salivating over it. They want more of this. They want to eliminate people they don't agree with. And you hear it in their voices. You can tell in that guy when he calls in yesterday and today, he's gleeful about this. He's probably driving down the road giggling out loud every time he hears that this poor polite fellow is dead now. And if you did watch some of the videos when he was giving the press briefings, it was pretty obvious he was a very calm, for the most part, calm man, and very deliberate in his thinking. But he also warned on Monday, as we shared with you yesterday. He knew what was coming, and he accepted it. Now, I didn't call him a martyr. I said he's the martyr for a lot of people out there, and that in itself is something that people should be worried about. I don't care where you stand on this. If this ends up being a very violent rebellion that now grows here out in the sagebrush, that's not going to benefit anybody, at least in the short term. This is from the Salt Lake Tribune. Utah ranchers renounce federal control of their lands at gathering with ties to Oregon occupation. Brian Maffley from the Tribune. 8 Utah ranchers on Saturday pledged to disavow their contracts regulating their use of public land to graze their cattle. The men made their declarations at a property rights workshop in Cedar City just days before the illegal occupation of the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge took a tragic turn. On Saturday, some of those ranchers agreed to sign notices of withdrawal of consent to be governed, in essence rejecting the BLM and U.S. Forest Service's authority to regulate use of their grazing allotments. These ranchers recognize they have a, quote, right, unquote, to pay grazing fees, which they will deposit in escrow until the ownership of Utah's public land is resolved. That according to a lawyer representing the men. I was reading that, sent this off to a friend this morning, and he's formerly a longtime member of the John Birch Society, which is known as being right of center. And he wrote back and he said, I'll tell you something. He said, both sides want this. He said, both sides are angling for public opinion in this. And he said, it is going to get worse, and it is going to get nastier. And these ranchers in Utah, before they made this conclusion, they had a briefing some months ago. They had a fellow who came and addressed them from out of state. And he spoke to them about what they needed to do, and that's why they're going ahead with this. What was his name? Robert LaVoy Finicum. Sound familiar? So they are following up on what he told them to do. Now, this happened before his death, but it does tell you something. They still plan to go through with it. And when I say that they have a martyr now, they definitely have a cause to rally to. Kind of like one of those remember the Alamo moments. But if we say that, some callers out there might still get upset about that too. I got news for you. Your side lost. That's because my side was better at what they were doing at the time. That is called war. But that's a story for another day. It's coming up on 8:20. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. 25. And a low fog in some areas this morning. I was taking a look at the horse pasture behind our building shortly before I went on air this morning, and there's a low fog that is floating around out there, but looks like we're going to have a relatively decent day. I was telling the business office this morning, we're in a pattern now where it's 40 degrees every day and nothing really happens. Kind of boring, I know, but at least there's no deep snow out there. We've got more on the way. Keep in mind, coming up in the next hour, the administrator of the Shuttle Challenger Commission is going to be joining us, spending a few minutes talking with us about the future of the U.S. space program.